All right, everyone. The time is 5:01, and this is a committee of the whole meeting of the Springfield City Council. I just want to thank other city staff, as well as members of the press and other guests for joining us this evening. I see some councilors still joining us in the queue, but we can go ahead and get started. All right, so as the agenda item indicates, this is a discussion of the Eversource property tax bill. And this information came to me by way of both councilors Fenton and Allen. So without belaboring the point, I want to just give them the floor at this time to provide some contextual information around how we got here and where we hope to go. So Councilor Allen, I will give it to you first. And I also, before you speak, Councilor, I just want to acknowledge Councilors Allen, Edwards, Letterman, Fenton, and Councilor Curran, who are in attendance to this meeting. Councilor Allen? And
thanks, Mr. President. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks, and thanks to you for setting this up so readily and stuff. So I'm going to give you a little background, a minute or two, and Mike will follow me, Councilor Fenton, with a little more, following up on anything I don't mention, and leading into, so that's really the agenda, is us speaking for 3 or 4 minutes and then handing it over to TJ Plant, our CAFO, and Patrick, the chairman of the Board of Assessors, will be presenting with TJ, and then we'll go from there in terms of how their presentation goes and how questions go, etc. But just to give you how this came about, over time in council meetings, you heard offhand comments sometimes about Eversource, and didn't sound good. Like there was Eversource owed us some stuff, but it wasn't ever totally clear to us exactly what that was. So we followed up and also looked at the management letter that is that the auditors write, and mentioned in there that there were overdue debts that were, affecting the city's ability to, be as financially sound as we want to be. I mean, we're obviously very financially sound, but there were some overdue debts, and the auditors saw fit to put that in their letter. So as we got into it, we found out that there was this really a large amount of money that was due. The number as we hear it now is 44 million, which is broken down somewhat between 26 of tax itself that was unpaid taxes, and then the interest that is accruing on this unpaid taxes, which is accruing at over $9,000 a day, so which is $3.5 million a year. That Eversource the bill is going up for them with every passing day. At the time we first heard about it, was 30 million or 40 million. Obviously, it just keeps growing. So I figured, how could this be true? We heard there was a change in valuation methods, which Patrick, I think, will explain to us later, and that Eversource didn't agree with the change in valuation method. Change in valuation methods that was done, 10 years ago or so, and as a result, they were taking advantage of a situation where you only have to pay 50% of your personal property tax bill. For all of us who pay our real estate taxes, we know if we challenge the real estate tax bill or we don't like it, we still have to pay it. And if you file an abatement and are approved, you'll get a refund of some sort. That's not the case in personal property tax. You don't need to pay it. You only need to pay half of it. And Patrick can explain that. And then you can just, the rest of it can remain unpaid, as this has done for the better part of the last 10 years. So that's that's kind of how we got going on it. And we asked a lot of questions of TJ and Patrick, etc. Or mostly I dealt with TJ, and he was dealing with Patrick, and obviously it's a huge financial issue, and he's our chief financial officer, so he's pretty abreast of it. So that's how we got into it. I'll turn it over to you, Councilor Fenton, for anything I didn't cover that should be brought up.
Thanks, Councilor Fenton. Councilor Allen. I would just add a few things. Just 2012, we changed the valuation method consistent with what Massachusetts Department of Revenue recommends for evaluating the Eversource owned infrastructure. because of a difference in treatment for real estate taxes versus personal property taxes, Eversource is not required under the law to pay the full amount that's in dispute. Very different, as Councilor Allen highlighted, if any one of us had an appeal or any one of our constituents had an appeal on their assessed value for their real estate taxes, you could not proceed with your appeal until you pay that tax in full. That is not the case for personal property tax, and that is a statewide issue. That is what I perceive to be a loophole in the state law that allows for companies to proceed with their appeals, even if they don't pay the full amount. It's just completely unfair when you compare it to what our constituents have to do to appeal something as simple as apply for something as simple as a residential real estate tax. And it's worth pointing out that Springfield's not the only one that's impacted by this. Eversource has similar claims in other communities, but they are treating Springfield differently. In Boston, for example, they have pending appeals on this valuation method, but they've made full payment. They haven't withheld the 50% of payment as they have here in the city of Springfield, and that's just completely inequitable. Again, the east-west divide we're seeing manifest itself in the form of the way that Eversource is treating the different communities. And the other thing that I wanted to highlight is that Columbia Gas, which was acquired by Eversource last year, they had a similar gripe with us going back to 2012 regarding this new valuation method. They filed appeals of those determinations, but they paid the full amount that was owed as and when due. And as time went on and it became more and more clear that the city's position was correct on this new valuation method, and the courts upheld it and the appellate tax board upheld it, Columbia dropped their appeal, paid in full under the full amount of the assessed value. And since Eversource has acquired Columbia Gas and that infrastructure last year, that's changed. And so the problem is getting exacerbated. Meanwhile, based on the report that I received from Pat Burns and from Chris Caputo, we're paying close to $5 million a year to Eversource for our electric bills, streetlights and other municipal charges, and now close to $1 million in gas bills. So we've got a lot of business with this utility company, and it's just a completely unfair way to approach this issue. And it's certainly a regional equity problem because of the way that they are treating other communities across the state differently. So we've had really active discussions with the administration. The administration's been working really hard to collect this over the course of these appeals. They've hired expert outside counsel and experts to analyze the methodology and to arrive at this figure and to make attempts to collect it. So I want to thank the mayor and TJ and their team for continuing to work with us on this. And it's really just, it's reached a boiling point, and it would be completely unacceptable for any one of us to not pay our property taxes or to not pay our ever increasing Eversource electric bills. And Tim and I felt that it was time that with the administration, we brought this issue to the public and to the rest of our colleagues so everybody could become aware and hopefully help us put some public pressure on Eversource to pay us what they owe us. And I think that is everything that I wanted to cover. And if it's all right with Tim, you and Mr. President, I would turn it over to the administration to give their presentation.
Thank you.
If I could just add one comment, you just alluded to it, Councilor Fenton, but I just want to underscore it that this is, we've been working with the administration on this for, several weeks once we found out about it, and at least a month. And we appreciate working with the administration on this. We know that everybody's in a bind trying to collect this money, and we saw it as an opportunity for us to work, together with in unison with the administration to go after Eversource, however we decide to do that, or to try to collect this money. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Allen. I just want to also acknowledge Councilor Davila, Councilor Hurst, Councilor Whitfield, and Councilor Brown for joining the call as well. And I will pass it to our folks at City Hall. If you could just introduce yourselves really quickly for the record, I'd appreciate it.
Sounds good. We'll start with Chris Caputo, the city treasurer collector.
As TJ Plant just said, I'm Chris Caputo, the treasurer collector.
I'm Matthew Fontaine, Board of Assessors.
TJ Plant, chief administrative financial officer.
Lindsay Hackett, deputy capo.
Patrick Rainhall, chairman of the Board of Assessors.
Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. President. Real brief on my part before we turn it over to Patrick to make the presentation. This is an issue we're happy to discuss, all the things that the city has been doing since 2012, both in terms of collecting the money owed to the city, also appealing and fighting the appeals from Eversource on the evaluation methodology. We have won at every step of the way so far. We think we have a strong case to be made, and we continue to make it. But we have been looking at this for a long time. It goes way back to when Richie was the chair in 2012, and it continues now. And so we're happy to provide the information to the council. I'll turn it over to Patrick so he can go through the history, the law, the decisions, and all that stuff, and then we can open up for questions.
Sure, yeah, I'll keep this pretty high level overview. Councilors Allen and Fenton, you both did a good job of summarizing kind of the issue. Our legal requirement as the assessors is to assess all property at the full and fair cash value. And until 2012, that was deemed what was called the net book value for utilities, including Eversource. That is basically an accounting term that's used. That was essentially the Department of Public Utilities would allow for the rate payers to recover the cost of assets acquired. What was happening, though, is that the transactions were over net book value. So the courts have kind of carved out a certain categories, and they're called special circumstances. And if assessors could show special circumstances, then they could assess it higher than the net book value. And in this case, the Appellate Tax Board, the Appeals Court, and the SJC have all determined that special circumstances exist for a variety of reasons that have come up in cases. So at this point, the net book value is no longer the ceiling for the assessment, but is really essentially the floor. City of Springfield, we did change our methodology approach in 2012 forward. And this new approach is basically looking at 50% of the net book value and weighting it with 50% of the replacement cost new less depreciation. That results in a fairly substantial shift in value. For example, the 2 years that have been heard on appeal for fiscal 12 and 13, that difference between net book and assessed value is about $61 million. So it's a substantial amount of levy that we were able to basically capture because of this methodology change. That methodology was upheld by the Appellate Tax Board, the Court of Appeals, the SJC, and then later the Department of Revenue in 2019 released a legal opinion, which I actually sent to all the city councilors today. And that also kind of gives the background history of the case law. They have also implemented it in their certification standards. I believe it was for fiscal 20 going forward that all municipalities in Massachusetts will have to basically comply with this new standard. Councilor Fenton is 100% correct that a personal property tax can be appealed as long as you pay 50%, at least 50% of the assessed tax. In this case, Eversource appears to be paying what they deem is the correct value, which is the prior to net book value approach. That's what they pay the city of Springfield. So the balance of what owed is the difference between the net book value and the assessed value. Unfortunately, from my point of view, we're just defending the values at the Appellate Tax Board and the Court of Appeals. Where it stands now, the fiscal 12 and 13, that was decided. We are now waiting for the appeal. We're at the brief stage at the Court of Appeals. I think Eversource's brief is due September 17th. City will have 30 or 60 days to respond to that. So essentially, that's kind of where we are as of now. I'm happy to take any additional questions.
Thank you. At this time, I will turn it over to the counselors for any comments or questions at this time. Counselor Davila.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the finance team for your presentation. Just a quick question. So what's the amount that Eversource paid and they think is a fair market value?
We'll take fiscal 12, for example. I'm sorry, they did pay fiscal 12, just to be perfectly clear. I apologize for that. They withheld some of the money for fiscal 13. So what was billed was approximately 9.8 million, and what was paid was 7.4 million.
Okay. And so how many years, I'm just kind of trying to get my head around this. How many years are they arrears? How many years they have not paid?
They have not paid the full amount for fiscals 13 through 21.
Wow. And that is because they disagree with the assessed value?
That's right. So the law allows them to pay at least 50% in order to challenge the assessment. And they have done that by paying the net book value equivalent in tax. So they've met that threshold.
Wow, that's a gap in loophole. And I know that if any resident in the city will not pay the utility bill that's connected in a heartbeat. And so, all right, and so you talked about $61 million. Is that using the new methodology that with the special circumstances, the new money that we could capture, or is that a totality over the O since fiscal year 13?
That was the 1 year I used as an example. So that was the difference between the net book value and the assessed value.
Okay, and so would you happen to know roughly how much pot of money we are looking to collect from them at this point?
They owe us approximately $44 million in total between unpaid tax and interest and penalties.
Very well. I thank you for that. And I just want to make a quick comment. I read today that I find that I'm shocked by this information, to be honest with you. I'm personally insulted, particularly when I read that they are planning to raise the utility bills, so it's something like $136, the average bill that they're going to be charging in Springfield, if I'm not mistaken. It's going to be going up. I find this baffling. I thank you guys for bringing up Councilor Fenton, Councilor Allen for bringing this to the forefront. And anything that we can do to collect this. But I will turn it over to my colleagues for more questions. And thank you for your hard work, guys. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilor Davila. Councilor Letterman.
Thank you, Mr. President. So what's the terminal appeal timeline, right? I mean, at what point will they exhaust appeal and be ordered to pay the total amount theoretically?
I can't answer the total amount, but I can say that the fiscal 12, which was paid, and the fiscal 13 with the balance, those were decided by the appellate tax board in, I think it was May of 2020. It's now at the appeal phase, and they are, by right, they have appealed at the Court of Appeals. They can ask, after a decision is issued by the Court of Appeals, they can ask the Supreme Judicial Court to take the case as well. But I suspect that they will not even accept the case to be heard. And the reason why is because there was a kind of a companion case with Springfield and Boston where it sort of tracked the same way. We used the same experts and the same attorney. And there, the appeals court ruled in the favor of the appellate tax board, which was also in favor of Boston, and the SJC declined to hear the case. So I would expect that to happen here as well.
But is each fiscal year being brought as its own case?
Yes, each fiscal year is always its own matter.
So this could take years to collect if we simply waited for the courts to order the payment.
That's correct.
So have there been any efforts to amend the state law and talk with the legislative delegation about this? And does the DPU play any role in this?
Yes, so the DPU could play a role in the sense that what they would allow to be recovered by the utility from the ratepayer. And clearly we would be advocating that they should not be entitled to recover any of the interest or penalties incurred by their business decision to not pay the full amount that's owed. So that can be something through the DPU. What was your first question? I'm sorry.
Hi.
My first question was relative to, well, we may have lost track here. So the DPU could play a role later on when they ultimately need to pay us, but that makes sense. But ultimately, they could continue to string us along for years, all the while keeping these funds in their coffers and reimbursing their ratepayers. I mean, or reimbursing their shareholders, I should say. So that's obviously outrageous. My first question was about if we've approached the legislative delegation about changing the state law to require full payment before an appeal. Have there been any talks in the legislature about that?
Not that I'm aware of. I did reach out last week to the MAAO, the State Assessors Association, and apparently that has been in discussion. I don't know if they've reached out to a legislator to have them sponsor that type of legislation. But right, you could amend the statute and leave the 50% threshold for kind of the smaller businesses, but narrowly kind of tailor it to public utilities. Where they would have to pay the full amount owed. But me personally, I have not reached out to any legislators on that.
Well, thank you very much for the insight. It's obviously outrageous and unacceptable, and should trigger some significant changes in state law. But I think one of the keys will be also making sure the DPU does rule that they don't recover this from the ratepayers. In the meantime, this should come out of their savings and their shareholders, not our ratepayers. And my last question is, how much is it costing us to defend this? And do we recover those funds if we win?
We do not recover those funds if we win. And I was trying to look at the numbers a few weeks ago. It's about $125,000 is the cost of litigation per year, essentially.
It's extremely disappointing to hear, that on top of all of this, there's going to be six-figure amount that we're expending just to collect the taxes we're due by public utilities. So certainly appreciate the efforts to bring it to the forefront. I think the public will have similar sentiments to what you're hearing here tonight, and certainly pledge my support for efforts at the DPU and state level. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Letterman. I'm not seeing any questions in the queue, but I do have one in the meantime, and that is just in regards to the loophole. Can you just provide some kind of like historical context as to why that was introduced? I just want to make sure history doesn't want to repeat itself here, because I think revisiting in regards to the state legislation around this is important, but how do we get here in the first place?
I actually don't know the history of that and why it's 50% for personal property. I'm happy to look into it and try to provide additional information.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Councilor Fenton, did you have your hand up in the queue?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I don't know what the legislative history is behind it, but doesn't seem fair, whatever the reason was. You got to pay your real estate taxes to appeal. You should have to pay the full amount of your personal property taxes to appeal. And with respect to Councilor Letterman's points, he is spot on about seeking a state change to the law that would require that. And in the meantime, I think we just have to demand that Eversource pay its bills. We pay our bills, city pays its electric bills, our constituents pay our bills, and Eversource should pay the city of Springfield what it owes us in full today.
Councilor Allen, if you don't mind, can I defer to Councilor Edwards first, and then I'll circle back.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to applaud everybody who's been involved, administration, Tim, the assessor, all involved, job well done. But I only had one question, which is there any risk or possibility that they would attempt to negotiate a settlement for the entire package, would not force them to have to pay the entire amount?
So Mr. President, I'll answer that question. So Eversource did reach out to have dialogue with the city over what is owed to the city in terms of the taxes and the penalties and interest. We've had ongoing conversations with them. None of it got to the point where it was so fruitful that we'd bring it to the Board of Assessors for consideration. We figured it was good government to hear them out to see if we're looking for, if we could come to some resolution without having to tie it up in perpetuity. We did not come to a resolution. We were not even close at the end of the day. And there was no in my mind, serious settlement talks in that level. But what I can assure you is that, the city has been on the forefront along with Boston and Newton on this issue since 2012 and before. And this is something that we've taken an active lead on in the Commonwealth. It's something that I know Richie Allen was involved in heavily at the Mass Association of Assessors, or whatever their title is. It is something that has been so important to us to make sure that we maintain our process and then stand by it, to the point where DOR has endorsed our process as the process for every other community. That doesn't happen often. I've worked with DOR for a long time, and for them to full throat endorse how we did it shows that we were on the right side of it. Second thing is, the city of Springfield, we're not cash poor. We have reserves. We're generating free cash every year. We're not in a situation where we're going to give away taxpayer money that's owed to the city on behalf of the residents. That goes towards services. That goes towards all, police, fire, DPW, schools, all that stuff. And we're not prepared to give any of that away just because they chose not to pay us. Had they paid us the full amount, we could be having a different conversation. But they made the business decision to withhold Springfield's payment and not do it to Boston. And that is what we're having that conversation on now. So I hope that answers your question, Councilor Edwards, but we're not ready yet to settle.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. I'm going to skip to Councilor Whitfield, followed by Councilor Allen, and then Davila.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. I just wanted to publicly thank Councilor Fenton and Allen for bringing this to the forefront again. And thank you to the Assessor's Office and the Finance team for the background information and moving forward to collect these funds that's owed to the city. And I want to echo what Councilor Fenton said. We pay our bills and we want to get paid today. He said today. So write that check, Eversource. Is anybody from Eversource on here?
No.
No. Okay. Well, today we need that. And Councilor Fenton and Councilor Allen, whatever next steps you decide, right into the state, whatever you decide, I'm on board with you, and I definitely appreciate the hard work.
Thank you, Councilor Whitfield. Councilor Allen.
Thanks, Councilor Whitfield. Yeah, a couple questions for this. I've got a few others I want to ask, but for now, maybe this is, well, to TJ and maybe to Treasurer Collector Caputo. What measures have we taken to collect? Is it, I assume we send delinquent notices or whatever. And I know that there's all this litigation delays and all that, but are there other actions that are typical actions to take on collecting some sort of debt like this, Chris?
So while it's in litigation, no, we have sent the delinquent notices. We have gone through our full process, but unfortunately, until the litigation's over with, there's nothing further we can do.
So by being in litigation, that just kind of keeps any of our other actions from being able to take place.
Correct.
Okay. How about DOR? One of the things that puzzles me about this is who are the big, oversight? Obviously, the city council is an oversight board in Springfield, but for the state, DOR, these other assessor boards or, treasurer collector boards or whatever. Who are the other organizations like that it just seems like they do this and they get away with it? And who else has the ability to dig in on this or to do some sort of influential things to make it harder for Eversource to continue to do this?
So I would argue that it's one of these ones that there isn't a lot of oversight, that comes to bear because it's 351 cities and towns that are negotiating with utility companies. They're setting rates. Some have problems, some don't have problems. I spoke with DOR directly, and it's not something that they would get involved in other than refer us back to the opinion that Patrick sent out, the chairman sent out to the council today. Just saying, follow that process, you'll be fine. As far as the collection, really what it took was a letter from the Mass Assessors Association, the Mass Treasure Collector Association, and the Mass Municipal Association to shine a light on that. This isn't a one-off in one community issue. This is, I want to say 40, but I don't know off the top of my mind how many it affects, but it is multi-jurisdictional, multi-city, multi-town. And once that letter went out, I think it started to resonate because the Mass Municipal Association can bring a lot of pressure, as well as the associations for treasure collector and assessors.
And so where we might have some oversight. So DOR, you said they don't want to get involved in it or don't see it as their role. How about state government? I mean, not just making legislation, but is there any other state agency or, you know, governor or whatever, anybody who would lend an ear to this and maybe take some action as the governor's done on other things that are important to us?
So the Attorney General's office got involved a little bit in the last year or so to ask some questions. Beyond that, I'm not so sure exactly. I guess I'd put it at the Attorney General level as a statewide issue, but I don't really, beyond that, I don't have an answer, sorry.
Okay. Well, my last question for this little thing is have we looked into offsets? We pay, $5 million a year to Eversource for electricity. Have we looked into, or do we have the authority to look into offsetting what we pay them because they owe us money, kind of thing? I mean, when we approve special permits and things of that nature, there's always a statement by, it used to be by Steve Lonergan, by Chris now, that, the taxes are up to date on such and such. Well, we have Eversource things all the time in front of us, and they're clearly not up to date on taxes unless this little loophole they found counts as being up to, that gets them off the hook temporarily. But, we still pay them. Is there any possibilities of something like that where we could offset our bill with by not paying that?
I don't know if you have it, Chris, but I mean, at this point, that's something I can talk to Eddie Pagula about and see if we withhold payment to get our money back, quote unquote. Now, I don't know if that's a draconian step we want to take or withhold permits. I don't know if that's how we want to take it, but it's a conversation we can have.
Yeah.
I think the last thing we need is them to shut the lights off for the entire city of Springfield, but this has been one of those delicate issues because we know we're winning and we know we have, if you're gonna peg it, I know they don't peg lawsuits or whatever. I'm not a lawyer, so don't hold me to it. But we're in the driver's seat. I would probably say 85%, there. We just gotta wait them out. And then we'll get the full amount. And there are some that say, let it keep ticking. $9,500 a day is a pretty good amount to keep collecting once we get it, once we win. There is threat that Eversource can go to the legislature for their own legislative relief in the reverse direction to have them change the way we assess their personal property. So there is that threat out there as well. This isn't, so they've had conversations saying they may go seek legislative relief themselves, and that's on them to determine and if they can muster the votes. But that's why it's a delicate balance.
I get that. I get it. I'm just looking at options, not suggesting anything.
No, I agree.
We just got to know what's out there for us. I'm okay for now. I might speak again, Mr. President, but I'm all set for now.
Thank you, Councilor Davila.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to just kind of echo a little bit what Councilor Allen was just saying. I think that the reality of life is that we have here in Springfield, we have a lot of people that are struggling to keep the lights on, the lights and the heat. people who have to make decisions whether or not they're going to buy medicine, they're going to buy bread, milk, or pay the utilities on a monthly basis. I am deeply disturbed by this. This is not, they cannot claim that this is anything related to COVID, of course. It's been going on since fiscal year 13 or so. And I am deeply troubled by it. TJ, I agree with you, it's a delicate issue, but I don't think that we should let them, and I understand you said that we're winning, hold those against the wall, because under the threat, they're gonna shut off the entire city electricity. I don't think we should write off.
They didn't actually threaten that, so I just want to be clear, they didn't actually threaten that.
No, I understand that, but the underlying, the underlying meaning could be that. I understand what you say, TJ, but by the same token, I think that we shouldn't write out the possibility of the permits, as Councilor Allen was saying. I'm not saying that we should go there, but all the options should be on the table. And I just finish with this, Mr. President. I publicly called on Eversource to withhold their planned utility tax bill increase until this issue is resolved. As I mentioned before, there's going to be an increase of about $12, $16 a month per household here in the city of Springfield. And so I call on Eversource to withhold that planned utility bill increase until this issue is resolved. The right thing to do. And those are my words. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Davila. Councilor Letterman, followed by Councilor Fenton.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one more question on the appeal process. If the appeals are all predicated on the assumption that the evaluation process was somehow flawed, which you said we recently secured ruling that it was not, and it will become the norm, is it not possible to consolidate them all into one case?
No, so the appellate tax board limits the number of appeals per fiscal year that they hear at the same time. And this is a really complex matter. So they would unlikely take more than 2 or 3 years sort of at a time. And the experts that are involved are highly technical, and their schedules are pretty far out in the future. So coordinating our expert, their expert, I think that's a great idea if they could put multiple years all on one sort of hearing, but I think that's pretty unlikely, to be honest.
Sure. All right, well, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Fenton.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilor Letterman, to your point, if the city ultimately does get a successful disposition of this at the appeals court, or if the SJC thereafter refuses to grant cert, I would hope that Eversource would do the right thing and drop the rest of its cases and pay us in full. Similar to what Columbia Gas did when they saw the writing on the wall with respect to the other related case that was decided in Eastern Massachusetts. So again, the big difference being that Columbia Gas didn't withhold payments. So I want to thank everybody for their comments and support. I wanted to say that obviously if other people have comments or questions, please make them. But the last thing that I wanted to say is that I'm going to talk with Councilor Allen and put together some type of next step, whether that's a resolution from us urging the legislature to take action and Eversource to make payment in full. And after we digest all the information and comments that other counselors brought here today, we'll get back to you on what that looks like. But in the meantime, the goal today was to share this information with our colleagues so that you could have all the relevant information that we thought was pertinent and germane, and get this dialogue into the public discussion so that we can use all the tools in our toolbox to have these bills.
Thank you, Councilor Fenton. Councilor Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question will be, what other cities and towns in the Commonwealth are having the same situation as we are having with Eversource?
I don't know the specific number, but the Department of Revenue's certification standards will require all municipalities going forward, once their certification is up, to comply with this standard. So it's going to be at least fiscal 24, where it's going to be every single municipality in Massachusetts.
So
I don't know how many appeals there are for other municipalities, or which other municipalities would have been paid or not paid. I don't know that.
So we have not made an effort in all these years to find this information to see who else is in the same boat in the Commonwealth?
Well, we can certainly ask the appellate tax board for their outstanding docket list to get that, but we have been working with other municipalities. The original appeals for us, the fiscal 12 and 13, we actually worked with Boston to put on the appeal. So we're not solo on this, but I just don't know of all of the other municipalities.
Mr. President, I asked that in our next meeting, when we have our next meeting, that we do have or get provided with this information so we find out for sure who else is in the boat with us, and not be working just by ourselves when we can unite with other cities and towns in getting this monster to give us what they owe us.
We did actually do that, just to be clear, for the fiscal 12 and 13. So we worked with other municipalities. We shared expenses, we shared experts, we shared an attorney as well. So it just sort of mitigated some of the costs, because some of it is sort of common, would be used in other municipalities. Some of it would be very specific to Springfield, so we wouldn't necessarily share those costs. But that did occur for 12 and 13. And at this point, we're still waiting for the appeal to tee up the other matters, 14 forward.
It sounds to me like you can not even mention a city or town that is in the same boat right now. You're talking general and not going as specific with this city or this town is having that information or that situation. And I would like to have that information myself.
Sure, I can try to get that for you.
Thank you, Councilor Gomez. I think that is a point well taken. Do we have any other questions or comments from the council at this time? Right, seeing none, I think it may be appropriate as the next steps occur to stay abreast of the issue. I'm happy to schedule a subsequent meeting to continue this matter and to have a fuller at length discussion around some of its components. So certainly happy to do that. Councilor Allen, and Councilor Fenton, I certainly will be in touch with you on those details. But I just want to make a final point, if I may, around the fact that we are legislators as councilors. And I think to Councilor Fenton's point, if there's anything that we can do to kind of push the ante and making this more of a widespread issue, because I think that this to Councilor Gomez's point, this is affecting other municipalities. And I think other folks are in the same boat due to this stipulation and loophole that it has been indicated. So Eversource needs to pay its bill. It's that simple. Councilor Davila, I will give you the final word here.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a suggestion, if I may. I think if the Madam Chair for the Finance Committee finds it appropriate, I do highly suggest that for the Finance Committee calls the appropriate executive of Eversource to give us an explanation as to what is going on. We've been in the dark for too long, and we need answers. And so that's my suggestion. It's up to the Madam Chair from the Finance Committee, but that we should ask them direct questions. We should look at the horse in the eyes and ask them questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Davila. And just a point to this, there might be details around this conversation that might be better reserved for an expression of some
things that could be spoken in public.
Just with respect to that, we can have those discussions around what meeting format this should be held in, but certainly considering that detail as well. Are there any other questions or comments from the council at this time?
I'd just like to make one quick, just a thank you to everybody for supporting us in this. We just had a hunch and we just followed on the hunch, and there was more there than we thought we were going to find, and appreciate your support. And we will work on action items, etc., and keep you guys in the loop on what we think we should proceed. But thanks for your support, and you'll be hearing from us.
Thanks, everyone. Happy to have the conversation next time you schedule any meetings. Happy to come to the table and chat.
And thanks to Patrick and TJ and all of you on the finance team for attending and helping out.
Appreciate you all. Have a good evening. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.